Now that we've got all the sketching done, it is time to get this inked. And I use a variety of different size pens, depending on what I actually need to do. And we'll just start filling in where we need to fill in. It's pretty much a case of following what's already here to begin with. There's a bit of a method here as well, because as I'm working through on these lines, I'm looking at that reference image that we saw in part 1, and that's helping me understand where the heavier lines need to be. I'm starting with a 0.3 pen, and this is my sort of middle-sized pen where I get most of the details down. Finer details like where the panel lines are here that are lighter in the reference image, I'll do those with a thinner pen, and we'll come back with a heavier pen and add some weight to the image so that the car feels a bit more grounded within the picture. One thing you do have to learn as well when you're doing inking like this is the confidence to just go with a line. And you don't use your wrist. It's always best to use your shoulder, because then you don't get those sort of shaky, jiggly lines. Unless that's what you're after, of course, but I'm not on this one. Also, when I have a long curve, instead of just starting the new part of the curve where I've stopped, I do overlap the line a little bit. You get a smoother transition that way. And one of my biggest obstacles recently has definitely been, as I'm recovering from this period of ill health, I do have slightly shaky hands. And it takes a fair bit of concentration just to stop my hands from shaking as I'm doing this. It means I have to go quite slowly a lot of the time. Unfortunately, I can already feel that my hands are starting to get a little bit jittery. Which means I have to stop for a little bit. But that's how it goes. It does require a lot of control to do this stage. I shall come back and do a little bit more when I've just let my hands relax a little bit. I'm back. Oh, it is a nuisance. Still, we persist. I think that's been probably the hardest thing for me to learn, is how to be patient with myself. I'm used to just ploughing on and pushing through, and I'm finding lately that if I try and do that, I make myself very ill. So if I take an hour or so break, then it means I can do an extra hour later. But if I push through, I might get half an hour's work done and lose 2 days to whatever it is that I'm dealing with at the moment. It's not ideal. But that's another reason why self-employment is very good for me compared to a regular job, because with a regular job there's no way I could be taking the breaks I need to take to manage my energy levels and be productive. Okay, we're going to move on to a finer pen now, because I need to do some of these finer lines. And there's not a huge amount of difference visible initially, but as we build up more inking you'll see that difference come into play. And if you do all of your inking with the same size pen and all of your lines exactly the same weight, it does end up looking very flat. So your variation is quite important. Now another little trick I do is the door shut on this side isn't very prominent compared to this side, partly because of the viewing angle and the way the panels sit, the light hits it. So if you want a fine line to look even finer, don't draw it solid, break it up a little bit. And it tricks the eye into thinking that that's a lighter line. If you spend a little bit of time looking at comics and illustrations, you'll notice there's all these little tricks that are put into them to give you the illusion of depth and light and all sorts of things that let you look at it and go, oh yeah, that's a thing, without even thinking about it. Off camera, I've finished the basic inking here. It was just a bit easier. Sometimes the camera is just kind of in my way. So we've got all the basic ink work done, and we've just got 2 ink weights here. So the major one, which is for like door shuts and things, and then the finer one for smaller details. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to make this jump out of the page a little bit, because at the moment it just sort of blends into the background. And for that I take the 0.5 and we start by just going around the outside of most of it. I am mindful when I do this as well. There's some areas where I don't want this heavy a line. So like the bottom of the wheel where it touches the ground, I want that to look a bit more like it's touching the ground. So I don't want as heavy a line there. But the bottom of the car, which is where the deepest shadow would be, I do want a heavier line there. And it's little tricks like that that really help give you some depth. And this is where illustration kind of comes into its own, because you're not being photorealistic or accurate with your lighting. You're giving an impression of where the weight and the light would be with the fewest lines you can get away with, really. And that's the challenge. Also helps you sort of give things a shape depending on how you finish the end of lines. So for example, at the front here where I've got this wheel, well, on this car the wheel would mostly be completely in shadow, which is why we don't see any of the wheel itself. But to separate that from the body and to give it some sense of depth, we add a small curve to this line here, and again at the front, and that just means that our eye reads that as being this is underneath the car, whereas before, without this little piece here, we weren't given that suggestion with the shadow. Now, I can't tell you exactly how to do all of these things, it comes with practice. And there are definitely illustrators out there who can work absolute magic with a pen, and I'm nowhere near their standard. And that's okay, we're all learning, we're all on our journey, and every piece I do I get a little bit better. Now the nose cone of the car gets a little bit more complicated here, because this curve is the nose of the car that sticks out in the middle, and then this is the headlight pod that sits behind. But if I put a very heavy line all the way down, this will look too separate. So I sort of have to go heavy up to sort of the middle area here, but not all the way along the top, because there's going to be more light here than there is down here. This one's a difficult one to explain, but essentially the heavier the line, the darker the part of the object, and it's not a hard and fast rule whereby everything that's going to be in shadow is going to have a heavy line. It's more like most areas in shadow are going to be like that. And again, you sort of learn it as you go. The more I try and think about how to explain this to you, the more I realise it makes less sense. So there's a lot of the eye of faith sort of situation going on. like this top edge of the bumper here, I don't want that to be too heavy, but I want it heavier than it is. Because I want it to lift out from the background, but I don't want it to be as heavy as this underside portion. And you've got to be careful as well, if you go too heavy you're going to change the shape of the object too much. So you've always got this sort of balancing act. And you have to be confident. If you second guess yourself too much, you can get stuck and make some very odd mistakes. Okay, so I've got the rough outline in here, so this is what now makes it jump out of the page a little bit at you, because this sort of border pushes the background away and lifts this forwards. It's a bit of an optical illusion that's going on. So now I have to figure out which areas I want to pick out and emphasize, and which areas I want to push into more shadow than they currently are, so that we get extra layers of depth happening on here. One of the key ones would be the rear wheel arch here, because most of this is in shadow and this does stick out quite a lot further than the wheel itself. So doing things like making the bottom of the handle there a thicker line helps give that sense that there's a shadow there and makes the handle sort of stick out from the car a little bit. I think this pen's running out of ink. Another thing I need to do as well is it doesn't look like there's a windscreen in here, because the black on the interior is just as strong as the outside, so I need to do something to make it look like there's some glass, and there's a very easy way to do that. Now on the side here we've got a reflection so you wouldn't see through, hence the squiggly line, and I think we can do something similar to that on the windscreen. So we basically ignore everything inside the car and we look at what's on the outside, which is the wiper blade here and the windscreen surround. This section is a trim, so that's inside, and one of the easiest ways to make this look like glass is a couple of lines. And there we go, that's a reflection. I think I need to put a bit more weight here. And I think we're very nearly ready for colouring. Yeah, I think this pen's spent. Okay, I'm going to leave this to rest for a bit. I've found that when it comes to ink work like this, it pays to just leave everything for a few hours, sometimes overnight, and then all the ink has the chance to dry, soak into the paper where it needs to, and I don't have problems when I clean off all the pencil lines. Once I've done that, I will then be able to colour it. I think I know which colour I'm going for, but stick around and you'll find out what I end up using. All the inking is completed. Sketch is tidied up so there's no more pencil lines on here because we don't need those. And I did do a little bit of research into what colours these cars were available in, and it looks like it was red, white or blue. There may have been some other variations, but that's what I was finding. The blue's sort of a slightly washed out kind of a blue, which is a little bit like this one but a bit darker. And the red is more sort of a burgundy type colour like this one. I've done quite a few red cars recently, so I think I want to do blue on this one. And now I know that the original photo, the car is also blue, so it won't be too difficult for people to find out what picture I've worked from, but then I've already mentioned it here, so you don't need to be a super sleuth to figure that one out. I always start when I'm doing colours with the lightest colour, and I'm using Copic pens for this. I don't always work in Copics, but I think that's the best choice for this one. And the idea is to try and follow where our highlights are on the car here. And you start light and go dark, because it's just about impossible to put light colours over dark colours. I'm really just going to colour in the whole body, because that will make blending the colours a bit easier as well than going over inked and uninked bits of paper. Now I know some artists tape down their paper to prevent it curling and wrinkling. I've never had that problem with these pens and this paper. They seem to work very well together. So I've never had that level of saturation on my work. If I'm doing watercolour, that can be different. And I haven't done watercolour for a while, maybe I'm due. You can't quite see that. There we go, that's better, you can see what I'm doing. Now, when I'm putting colour on, I do tend to separate into sections where I can, because the one problem with Copics, as with all felt tip type pens, and ink in general really, is that because it's got transparency to it, when you overlap, you will be able to see those pen strokes. You can use that to your advantage, and it allows you to put reflection lines and things in. But if you're not careful, you can end up with them showing up in directions you don't want them to be. So I always try and follow sort of the line where I'm expecting reflections and high points to be. I think this pen might need filling up a little bit, it's a bit squeaky. So yeah, when we're doing a larger area like the body here, you want to make sure that you follow the line of where your reflections are going to be. and as you build up your layers, you have to bear in mind that every single layer is going to show through until you get to colours like blacks, which obviously are a lot more intense. Okay, now we've got the basic coat on here, and it's quite streaky in places, which is fine. I can use that to my advantage. But what I want to do now is just build up any areas where I want it to be a bit smoother, because as I build the darker layers up, that will help. I am a little bit limited on how many colours I've got as well, so I have to be fairly creative with what I've got available. I could go and buy some more, but Copics are not cheap, and I am not wealthy. They do actually sell like the full set and refills and everything. I'd absolutely love to get that, but a little bit beyond my reach right now. We've got a big shiny spot there. Right, so we've got that there. Okay, that will do for our first layer. It's a little bit tricky to see on camera because this is a very odd colour. I've now got to figure out which of these blues to use to get this where I want it to be. I don't think we'll use this one because it's too strong. So I'll work my way down through the grades here. The biggest problem is from here to here is quite good for blending. From here to here isn't. That's quite a big jump. I could do with an extra colour, but I don't have it. So we'll just have to make do with what I've got. Depending on what I'm working on will depend how long I leave the ink to dry. Sometimes you want it to be fairly fresh so that you can blend. I like to have the base coat, when I'm doing it this way, to be mostly completely dry. I don't want to blend too much into it, so that when I do this layer, there's some distinction between the two. And now is the challenge of making sure I have these lines where I want them. Now I'm not doing the lines precisely like they are in the photograph because the reflections I want are a little bit more uniform. So I don't want to be picking up reflections of people and other items in the scenery on the original photograph because they're not here on this one. So I'm using the photograph as a guide, so I know, for example here, that's I think a person, this looks like it's probably a person back here, and then on the wing you've got this sort of jaggedy edge where again it's people, this is people's heads and things, so I need to sort of even this out using the eye of faith a little bit and make that what my reflections are on here. More about a rough idea of where things go. This also helps give you the dimensions of the car, so it'll help make the curved shape of it more apparent. When I do this, if I want a very light line like that, I tend to hold the pen quite a long way back and just let my hand shake a little bit as I draw it, and it just gives a more convincing reflection than if I try to draw it really, really straight. The real challenge is areas like this where I'm missing sort of the colours in between that I'd like to have. So I just have to do my best. That's a noise. That is a noise. They're the same colour, so... Oh, and I mumble to myself a lot when I'm doing this kind of work. It's funny, only since doing these little videos have I realised how much I do it. Just vocalise my process. I think this pen might be a little bit dry. That's okay, I'll just finish this bit and then we'll fill it up. Now, you can see here how it's quite stripy, and that's just as this pen's been running out of ink, which yeah, is quite obvious with the chisel tip. Much better. Now we can do a little bit of blending, because sometimes you want to smooth out a transition a little bit, and that's the really nice thing with Copics, is you can just do that. The closer your ink colours are, the easier it is to do. The other nice thing is, like on the nose cone here where it's a little bit stripy, I can blend out with the paler colour and it just sort of smudges everything together a little bit where you need it. Now this one, a little bit nervous about using this because this is quite a big jump from where we are to where I want to be. So I'm going to start with the very darkest shadows, like here on the headlight pod, and just see what we end up with. You can't always experiment with the thing you're working on. I said I was going to start with the headlight pod, I'm starting at the front of the nose cone, because I know that's one of the darkest shadows, so that's the least risky area. Oh yeah, that's not so bad. I think that will do. I think it looks about right. I'm not going to go into doing the chrome yet. Instead, I'm going to go into doing the interior, which seems to be sort of like a pale cream and tan biscuity sort of colours. We won't do this window because that's got the reflection, so I want that to stay solid. I don't know anything fancy with chrome. You can get all kinds of interesting effects, and at my scale it just doesn't make a lot of sense, so I keep things simple, which is often best. A lot of the cars I work on do have quite a bit of chrome on them. Now, the original for this has a painted front bumper, which would have been chrome originally. Possibly nickel plated, although the pictures do look like it is actually chrome. So, since we are doing our own version of that original reference, I shall return the bumper to chrome. Again, I have a paucity of different shades here, but chrome, one of the nice things is your reflections tend to be very sharp, so you can get away with not having quite all the shades you want to work with. And again, we're ignoring the reflections of people. We're just going for a fairly uniform sort of a look here. And there we go. The chrome is as done as it needs to be. One concession I will make though, I think, is because of how these pods sit, you can see there is a reflection of the shadow on them. So I'm just going to put a hint of blue in here. It just helps sort of suggest that there's a reflection going on from the bodywork. Since our main subject is done now, I'm going to be brave. I don't think I can do the background exactly as I was going to do it, but I think I can do a variation that will work, and I think it needs something. I can't undo all the lines I've already put on there. I've got to do something. And this background colour is the other reason I chose blue, because I knew it would work a bit better with this than the red. Okay, so far so good. All my pens are running out today. They all seem to run out together. Now the scary bit, which is the black. No going back once you do this. It's very intense as a colour. There's one more bit of black that I should do on this, and it's such a big risk, I don't know if I want to do it. I'm going to turn the camera off and do this last bit I want to do, because I don't want to feel like I'm being watched as I do it. And hopefully it works. Right, back to the beginning. We've got our reference photograph here that we've been working from with our little Daihatsu B, and you're probably wondering if I did use the black ink that I didn't want to do on camera. Let's find out. looks like I did. I'm really, really happy that I went this way with it. I really like this. I think it turned out great. There we have it. One finished piece of artwork, start to finish. This is the first time I've recorded the process. I'm not massively comfortable having an audience while I'm working live on a piece. I like to take my time and go at my own pace. And if I've got people watching me, it kind of throws me off a little bit and I don't feel like my work's quite as good. That aside, I'm going to do another video going into my thoughts on the whole process with videoing artwork rather than putting this in here. So instead, all that remains is for me to say thank you for watching, especially so if you've decided to like the video or leave a comment or subscribe or any of the above. If you want to keep up to date with what's coming up and you want sneak previews of the next piece of artwork I'm working on, then be sure to go to my Patreon account. And if you want prints of this one or the original artwork, then take a look over on my website. And of course, go in the description box, there's links to all kinds of things in there. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to create a picture of a Daihatsu B. I can't imagine there's anybody else out there has done a video on exactly this subject in exactly this way, and hopefully there will be more to come in the near future. Take care out there, and I will see you Tuesday at 3 PM.